everybody. I'm Charles Pickles, and I'm British. I'm from the United Kingdom. In 2002, a little bit to introduce myself. In 2002, after working in the industry for a few years, I founded a company, namely Lucian, which I successfully exited 2 years ago now. And so I worked at Lucian for 19 years, during which it went from a startup to being the leading asbestos consultancy in the UK. So as such, I have considerable experience and practice of managing asbestos in situ. So in the last 2 years, I've been running a campaign entitled Airtight on Asbestos, which aims to improve the management of asbestos in situ in the UK and raise awareness about such issues. Key numbers are that the UK in the last century imported more asbestos per capita and more of the amphiboles than anywhere else in the world. And in the period 1994 to 2008 and now indeed, the UK has the highest mesothelioma rates in the world. So Generation 1, this is a recognition of asbestosis as a problem in the 1920s and 30s. In 1924, we had Nellie Kershaw, the first recorded death from asbestosis, poor lady. In 1930, we had the Merriweather and Price reports on the dangers of asbestos and dust suppression. And very shortly after that, 1931, the first asbestos industry regulations. In the second generation, 1930s and 40s, we had the recognition of lung cancer. Generation 3, the arrival and recognition of mesothelioma in the 1950s and 60s. In 1969, we had the asbestos regulations with quantitative limits in all workplaces. So that's not just asbestos factories, that's now all workplaces. Generation 4, we've got, so this is 1970 to 2002, really. Ever tighter asbestos control. So 1974, Health and Safety at Work Act. 3 bits of legislation in the mid-80s, asbestos licensing regs, asbestos prohibition regulations. So that's really the banning of andesite, but not chrysotile. In 1987, the control of asbestos at work regulations, which called for fibers to be lowered, fiber levels to be as low as is reasonably practicable. Moving forward, we had 1999 asbestos prohibition regulations, which banned crucidolite. And in 2002, we're moving now into duty to manage asbestos in situ. So regulation, at the top level, we have the government, the parliament passes acts, legislation. I'll give you a couple of examples. Health and Safety at Work Act and the control of asbestos regulations. The Health and Safety Executive then produces guidance notes on how society can best adhere to this legislation. And the guidance notes take the form of documents like HSG 264. Now we'll move on to policing. The HSE are responsible for policing their legislation, and this is achieved through inspections. Within the asbestos industries, we have 2 other levels of control, which is the asbestos licensing unit. So any company wanting to remove asbestos has to be licensed by the Health and Safety Executive. Similarly, for the consultants, surveyors and analysts, we have to be accredited by the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. the first thing to recognize here is that we don't make or import asbestos anymore. So we're talking about managing asbestos in situ. In the UK, we only have one real number, one level for managing asbestos in situ, and that is called the clearance indicator, and it's set at 0.01 fibers per milliliter. When we are surveying, we take a bulk sample of material, and it's analysed using an initial step of low power stereo microscopy. And if you find any fibers, we then use polarized light microscopy to identify the asbestos type, suspected asbestos type within the building sample. So that's for bulk samples, that's for building samples. And for air samples, we in the UK use phase contrast microscopy to a limit of detection typically of 0.01 fibers per milliliter. By contrast to other countries, we don't use electron microscopy on a routine basis. The duty to manage legislation covers all non-domestic property. So domestic property is excluded. So about 40% of all buildings are excluded. Not ideal. The first thing to do is locate the asbestos. The next thing to do is keep an annual register of where your asbestos is, if it's removed or encapsulated or protected. The next thing is assessing the risks from the materials. So once we've done that risk assessment, we then produce a plan to manage the risks. The duty is to manage the risk. So that is the guidance is that we look at the building materials, the condition of the materials, the access of the materials, the makeup of the materials in terms of fiber types, and from those parameters we assess the risk. One I choose is the big one, handing in plain sight. So first of all, let's be clear, asbestos is the UK's #1 occupational killer by a very large margin. And we know that the clearance indicator set at 0.01 fibers per milliliter is far above the level at which mesothelioma can be induced. So it is our law in the Health and Safety at Work Act and the Control of Asbestos regulations to measure asbestos fibers to as far as is reasonably practicable. So, but we're not doing that in plain sight, which means we see it every day, but we just walk by because it's the norm. However, it's completely prides itself on a pragmatic approach, helpful when we're managing asbestos in situ, because it's a number of nuances, but the risks from let's get specific and talk about asbestos insulation board in let's say a school are very much higher than if it's an amosite board than whether it's a chrysotile board. The HSC are very active in tweaking improving the guidance incrementally. We need to to move on from the era when we were working with asbestos. We're only dealing with asbestos in situ now. So I think going forward in the UK, as many other countries now have done, we need a strategic national asbestos management plan. And the other thing is a national asbestos register is fundamental. Awareness is in some places very, very good, and in some places not so good. Like anything, you know, members of the general public have varying levels of awareness about asbestos. Some know about it, some don't. 100 years ago now, generation 1, asbestosis, generation 2, lung cancer, generation 3, mesothelioma in miners and asbestos factory, generation 4, mesothelioma in tradespeople. Now we've got generation 5, mesothelioma in the occupants of buildings containing asbestos. The numbers of mesotheliomas for people who've just worked in buildings containing asbestos is rising. So legislation doesn't follow exposure; it follows deaths. So we need to invert